Christmas holidays are finally here. At the time of broadcasting, I have finished work, school's out, and it has all begun. The Christmas holidays are looked forward to by every child in the Western world. The presents, the decorations, the seasonal food, family for dinner, and the spreading of the message of goodwill to all. The modern Christmas is enjoyed by all. However, people have changed the nature of the Christmas celebration so much that the original meaning has been forgotten in the rush of commerce, in the rush of consumerism, and obviously capitalism as we know it today. So some people have attempted to rediscover the real meaning behind Christmas and have ended up tracing it all the way back to pagan festivals, which has caused many to call into question the Christianity of Christmas. With all that in mind, I'm going to use this as the opportunity to look into it using the history of ideas. For Christians, it's a time of particular celebration, the time that our Saviour Jesus Christ was born unto us, and many attend church services in the run up to the big day, even those who don't normally attend church. It's as much a part of life as the turning of the seasons, and is nearly impossible to think about this end of the year without timing things regarding Christmas, such as the big shop, when work finishes, when school's out, and when's a good time to see your relatives. The idea of not having Christmas is quite shocking. So when I heard that some people were doing a Cromwell and not celebrating Christmas because they saw it as not Christian, I had to investigate it. Now, there are many pagan festivals around this time of year. Anyone who studies prehistory knows that full well. And it's well known that in the early Catholic Church, they tended to incorporate the customs and festivals of other cultures into the doctrine to better assimilate people into the Christian faith. Now, it's a strange way of doing things, but it worked very well and resulted in the rapid spread of Christendom throughout the Holy Roman Empire and beyond. It makes perfect sense that they would Christianize the pagan winter festivals. But is this true? And if so, which festival does Christmas replace? As I said, there are many winter festivals around this time of year. Those people that study the Celts know they had the winter festival of Yule, which is on the winter solstice. And many of our Christmas traditions come from this, such as the Yule log, the dressing of the tree, and even some Christmas carols call for the Yule tide to be gay. However, since Christianity developed in the Middle East and was spread by the Roman Empire, it is believed that the Roman festival of Saturnalia is the one that's taken over Christmas. The fact that it finishes on the 25th of December does tend to help. However, this only happens in the Western Empire, from Constantinople onwards. In the Eastern Empire, the Byzantine Empire, they celebrate it later in the year. This could be down to some discrepancy about when Christ was born. Whilst the Eastern Orthodox churches tend to keep Christmas on the 25th, it may still fall outside of the Western understanding of it due to some of them using the Julian calendar, which is 13 days behind everyone else who traditionally used the Gregorian calendar. For more information, look up both those calendars. Certain Saturnalia does give us many of the traditions, gift giving, that are practiced at Christmas. That does not necessarily mean Christmas miracle didn't happen, and therefore is blotted out. Now, because the Christmas story is so well worn, I'm not going to ramble on about it, but many people know that Jesus was born in Bethlehem and is well known to be born the Virgin Mary. Now, others are quick to point out that we don't actually know when Jesus was born, as it was never written in the Bible. Now, this is a fair point. To be fair, there are a couple of very simple explanations. Firstly, Jesus was born into obscurity and poverty. Birthdays weren't really a thing to the poor, and only the rich and noble would make a point of noting down the date of the child's birth and celebrating in later years and giving them gifts. Since Jesus was born into a carpenter's family, he wasn't exactly well known, not until far later on, and even then, he wouldn't be sharing it. The second reason, King Herod, upon hearing from the wise men that a child was born king of the Jews, had ordered that every male baby up to the age of 2 years old was to be killed. As Herod died before Jesus began his ministry, a sense of paranoia around what would happen around your birth would certainly keep people from blurting out when he was born, if he knew it himself. The disciples wouldn't have known for certain, though it's possible the scholars amongst them, such as Luke, may have done the research and cross referenced things said in private with the records found. So they may better find a way he was put on that date. But we're not entirely sure ourselves. So can we get an idea of when he was born? Well, some people have done just that. According to the Gospel of Luke, Caesar Augustus called for a registration of the populace, census, you will. That necessitated people to travel to their place of birth, for tax reasons, apparently. There's not really much evidence this happened, there's hardly any records, so we're not entirely sure whether this would have happened at all. Some people are bringing into question if it did happen, would it have happened in midwinter? Because it wouldn't seem like a likely time for people to travel. This is understandable, but largely based on a Western understanding of the climate. Certainly, travelling in midwinter isn't pleasant, certainly in mainland Europe, North America, or even the UK. But Bethlehem isn't in that region. It's in Israel, on the Mediterranean Sea, which is subtropical, an area known for a warm climate. Now, not to say that it can't get cold, just not as cold as one might expect. I don't remember the exact temperatures, but they don't drop into the negatives. They hover more around the single figures. Also, saying that it was midwinter is a very Western idea, as Israel's winter starts in December. It would have been relatively early winter. And if we think about it, it might have actually been a far more sensible time to travel than any other. In summer, it's boiling hot. Cooler temperatures are better to travel in. A hike in the winter is easier than a hike in the summer. And these guys had to travel about 100 miles from Nazareth to Bethlehem. That's not an inconsiderable distance, particularly for a woman in late pregnancy. Secondly, little farm work would have been done in the winter. Granted, Joseph was a carpenter, but lots of people in the area would have also been farmers. So, forcing everyone to drop their tools and leave their crops would have been detrimental to the empire. doing detrimental to the people. So it's certainly possible that the birth happened in the winter, and so Mary and Joseph had to travel to Bethlehem. Others have made the point that shepherds don't stay out in winter to look after their sheep, but keep them under cover. That was certainly the case in Jesus' day, and is still practiced today, as far as I'm aware. Another point that's hard to refute. But let's think of it this way. If a carpenter had to be registered in his hometown, why not the shepherds? They could have been out in the fields and then heard the census, and seeing as their work was just as vital to the populace, they would have to be registered as well. So they would have to, it would be more sensible to take their sheep with them. And if Mary and Joseph, a man and a woman, with a child literally on the way, couldn't find room to stay and had to stay in a stable, what chance would lowly shepherds have? They're used to looking after their sheep after dark, so keeping them in the pastures next to Bethlehem would be the next best thing. Who knows, they may have been heading over to the stable anyway, hoping they'll be able to stay with their sheep for the night. But we really don't know. These are just thoughts I've had based on what I've read in Scripture, and they seem to make a lot of sense. Well, certainly as much as anything else. Now, it is well understood that the Catholic Church did set the date for Jesus' birth as the 25th of December. Is there a timeline we can draw to determine that that was the exact day that he was born? Some have used the reference that Jesus was conceived at the time of year he was crucified. It's like around about Easter time, making his life a perfect cycle of years on earth. This, again, is disputed between the Western and Eastern churches, with the Western church saying it's 5th December, and the Eastern church saying it's on January, which interesting enough brackets the 12 days of Christmas. Whether that was deliberate or whether that just happened to spawn out of that is unknown. Certainly by me. Others use the times present in the Gospel of Luke regarding the duties of Zachariah. Zachariah being the father of John the Baptist, or presumably, seeing as his wife Elizabeth was 6 months pregnant at the time Mary visited, and Mary mentioned she was carrying Jesus and been told by the angel Gabriel. This gives us a somewhat clearer idea of when Jesus was likely born. I'm not entirely sure of the seasons that Zachariah was working in the temple. I'm not that sort of scholar. I'll see if I can link some other pages that give you those dates, but I personally question whether Mary was conceived Jesus at the time, or whether she was pregnant with him for a bit longer before then. We don't entirely know when John the Baptist was born, and therefore we're not entirely sure where Jesus was likely born. Either way, it's an interesting line of inquiry. I'll be interested to see what people come up with. Interesting enough, the Romans had another festival around that time of year, possibly the end of Saturnalia. Deus Natalis Solus Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered sun. Certainly sounds like a very Romanized version of the Christian celebrations. So, For all we know, it was quite possibly Christianized into what we have today as Christmas. However, some say we're getting it the wrong way round, and that it wasn't an attempt to Christianize the Romans, but an attempt to Romanize the Christians. Yes, the Romans established December the 25th as Christmas in 336 AD. But that date was a Christian celebration long before this, and has records going back to 202 AD. So that's at least 100 years beforehand. The conception figure was canonized in 221 AD. You may think, so what? Well, Solus Invicti wasn't instituted until 274 AD, which was considerably later than Christmas. Furthermore, the Catholic acquisition of cultural festivals wasn't part of the Christian movement at the time. In fact, they were trying to separate themselves from Rome and become their own entity. So this is a different way of looking at it. And certainly an interesting question as to whether Christmas was actually a thing. Now, many people point out at this point that there was no such thing as a Christ Mass at that time of year. It is relatively modern compared to some of the older Christian traditions. However, many other masses, many other celebrations are not actually biblical. Michaelmas or St. Michael's Mass that happened before Hallowmass or Halloween. That was a rather interesting time of year where things started all the misty, and the blackberries started getting infected with evils. So traditions around that developed. If you think about it, Hallowmass, that wasn't really celebrated at the time. Pentecost wasn't really celebrated in the Bible. Not even Easter. People didn't celebrate. In fact, they were dumbfounded. They didn't really know what was happening. You could say they had a bit of a party at Ascension, but we don't really think of Ascension as important anymore. Apart from the time when Christ ascended into heaven. Which, in my opinion, puts the question of whether Christ lived a full cycle of years on earth, or whether he stayed over a little bit longer afterwards when he was crucified. You have to remember, in this case, he returned in a physical form, not as some stories have it, as a godly form. This is important to remember because many people are constantly pointing out that similar stories exist, and therefore Jesus didn't actually exist and was merely based on other myths at the time, such as Mithras, Tammuz, Asclepius, even the Egyptian deities, Isis, Osiris, and Horus. Unfortunately, there are attempts to prove that they are merely fabrications linking to Jesus, and therefore disproving him, either fail to match up closely enough with the main story, often resulting in key differences, fell outside of the window of influence and cultural appropriation, or just had facts made up about them to seem more plausible. I know my history of ideas is all about things that sound similar might mean the same. In this case, not necessarily. If you're trying to disprove things, similarities are not what you need. You need facts. You need exact correlations. With all that in mind, how likely is it that we're actually celebrating the birth of Jesus at the right time of year? Simple answer is we don't really know. Certainly not for sure. However, we do know that at midwinter, celebrations happen a lot. Not just in pagan cultures, but in pre Christian Jewish traditions. Hanukkah, interestingly enough, starts on the 5th of the Jewish month of Kislev, which is the 2nd of December. That's an interesting fact that might be worth considering. The Hindu festival of Diwali, the Scottish festival of Hogmanay, and many more occur around this time of year. In short, winter was a time of dark and fear. Having a festival at that time of year keeps people hopeful for the future, and more importantly, brings light into the night time of the year. The fact that Christmas happened after the solstice might be worthwhile mentioning here as well. But at the end of the day, we have something to celebrate. Christ was born among us, and that's a wonderful thing worth celebrating. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful festive year, and I hope to see you in the new year. God bless, and Merry Christmas.